Okay, so in this video, we're going to be doing a full deep clean of our airbrush. In our previous video, we did a back cleaning. So in this video, we're gonna do the back and the front. Now, what I recommend is that you watch the video one time full through, all the way through, and then go back and do it with me. Take your time, go slow. If it fails and your airbrush isn't functioning properly, go back and take your time, pause the video, and work with me. So how often do we want to do this? It depends on how often you use your airbrush. If you airbrush regularly, probably every month or two is fine. If you do it almost, a couple times a month, you can probably do it once a year. So to begin, let's go through the things we'll need. We're gonna need a thingamajiggy or a toothpick. This is our airbrush cleaning set from our website, the little wrench from your kit, a tiny Ziploc baggie, paper towels, a bowl of water, an empty bowl, and then this is optional, but sometimes you might want to rinse a part, and so that's what that's for. Also, go ahead before we begin and add some water and just flush out whatever color's in here until it runs clear, okay? So that way you won't have color all over your hand. So let's get started. To get started, I always test out my airbrush. Everything's working fine. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my compressor and then quick disconnect here. We're gonna start with the back half and we're gonna pull that apart pretty quickly. So this is for our smaller pieces so they don't get lost. And I will, if you want to put that, actually let's keep all of our back pieces in front of us and then we'll put our front pieces in that bowl. So I'm going to unscrew the chucking nut there. Here is the spring case, spring, needle, chucking assembly, trigger. Now, that's our whole back half, okay? For our front half, let's go ahead and unscrew our crown cap. Now, if these pieces get stuck, you can use a piece of paper or a cloth and then just some pliers. And the reason for this is just so you don't mar the metal on your airbrush. So we're gonna unscrew this, and if you wanna dip it in your water and just give it a quick rinse and pop it in your little bowl there, you can do that. Next, we're gonna remove our nozzle cap, okay? This nozzle cap has an O-ring, so we wanna be mindful of that O-ring. If you wanna do a quick dip here, you can go ahead and do that. You can use your brush. For this set, we're always going to use our smallest brush from our set. We're gonna clean here quickly, very gently. We don't want to cause any damage and we don't want to lose our O-rings, okay? I'm going to drop that in there. Next, we are going to use our little wrench that's included with our kit. We're going to unscrew this nozzle very gently. Okay, and now, just as a refresher, there's a tiny little O-ring right there. We don't want to use that. Again, that's a sealer, so we don't have air leaking. Now, we're gonna pull off this piece, okay? We'll come to here in a second, but let's clean this. For our whole kit, this is a generic airbrush cleaning set, but for the designer cookies, we're always gonna use the smallest one. You can dip this in here, and it doesn't go all the way through, so just go in as much as you can, and then also from here. It's the second from the largest. So I'm gonna find the second from the largest, and you want to go gently back and forth with this. If you feel any tightness, don't force it, okay? So we're gonna put that guy down. Now, this is where our Ziploc baggie comes into place, and then also our either thingamajiggy or our toothpick. So I'm going to very gently remove this O-ring. Don't lose that. He tends to want to bounce every which direction. And I'm going to place him in my Ziploc bag. This is just as an extra assurance that I don't lose him, okay? Now we can clean our body. If you've seen people drop this whole thing in there, I don't personally like to do that. And that's because I don't think metal and water are friends and they cause rusting. So we are going to clean here. Now, for this, again, I'm always using the smallest brush. I'm gonna dip this in. I like to try to avoid our MAC valve and this portion with the quick disconnector. And I'm gonna go this way, through here. Now, I'm not using any chemicals. I'm not using vinegar. I'm not using any soaps. We're working with water-based paints or food colors. Not a lot of sticking, very, very viscous. So we're not gonna have a lot of issues like an airbrush artist might have with a solvent-based paint. So this is typically enough, okay? If you want to, you can run some alcohol through there once you're done with this process. Now, I am going to spend a little bit of time drying this whole thing up. I'm also gonna spend some time drying this. I want it nice and dry. And that's our cleaning. So I still see a bit of water in there. I just wanna get all that water out. Now we're ready to put this back together. So, looks a little bit daunting, but I can assure you we'll take it step by step and we'll get this back together in a jiff. Okay, we're gonna start with this little guy. Just be careful, he likes to bounce and roll, and there he is, okay. You can see right in there, that's his little home. And again, we're gonna use either our toothpick or our thingamajiggy, and I'm going to push him in place. I'm gonna spend a good minute or two, maybe not that long, just a few seconds, make sure he's really seated in there properly, that he's not pushed over. Next, we're ready for this, okay? Now, when we put this in, we want it to go directly into that hole. We don't wanna push our O-ring and block some of that airflow, so we're going straight down. Now for this piece, this one does get a nice solid tightening. You don't need to crank with all your might. But just, you know, so that there's no air leakage. Next, we're gonna go for our nozzle. For our nozzle, we're gonna need our tiny little wrench again. Now this piece is different from the others in that we just, I start out with my fingers, there's my O-ring. Okay, I wanna make sure that's in there. And I just start with my fingers and just barely tighten this until it's in place. Now, with our tiny wrench, we are going to just give this a very gentle tightening. I just felt it give. Okay, now, please don't be tempted to crank and crank and crank, okay? Because the threads and the nozzle will actually break off and your threads may be stuck inside. So just till you barely feel it give and then just barely a tiny bit more, okay? That's great, I'm happy with that. Now we're going to go with our nozzle cap. So this is still a tiny bit wet. There's our O-ring. That's in place. And we're gonna screw that on. Now this piece again, you wanna give that a nice solid tightening, okay? We're gonna leave our needle cap off for the time being, and that's because I wanna make sure that when we insert our needle, we can see it coming out. So that's our front portion. Now we're gonna move to our back. Please refer to our previous video on how to know your triggers in the correct position. This may take a second. It's a little bit movie. That's in the correct position, okay? You'll get faster with practice. Next is our chucking assembly. And then we're going to go to our spring, our spring case. Next is our needle. If you didn't clean your needle, go ahead and just give it a dip and a wipe, and that should be good. Now, just as a refresher, I talk about this in every video because it's important. When we insert our needle, we don't want to point up or down because we risk bending our needle. So I always put my finger in place as a guide, and I want to go straight through. Right here I feel it give, but it's not in the correct position. So I'm going to gently ease this in, gently. Now you're gonna watch as the needle comes through. Can you see that? It's about 1.25 millimeters. That's why we left our needle cap off, so we could see that coming out and know that it's in the correct position. Next is our chucking nut, then our back handle, and just as a quick refresher, you're gonna wanna line that needle up there. And then finally, be very careful again here because you can risk a bend. You're just gonna wanna go straight down. This is our needle cap, and just as a refresher, that's there to protect our needle from bends. So that is the deep cleaning. Now finally, I always like to test. So I've just plugged in, I'm gonna turn on my compressor, and that sounds like it's working properly. If it sounds like air's leaking, just go back through and repeat the process. Again, no panic. You might have to do it twice. Something may not be seated properly, but that is our deeper cleaning. And just as a reminder, depending on how much you airbrush, you may want to do this every couple months. If you barely ever airbrush, you're probably fine to do this once a year.